Things are like popcorn in the microwave. Then it slows down.
Yeah.
When it's time.
You gotta wait for a 2-second break between the chatter. Open the door.
Did he give us a thumbs up?
I didn't see it.
Okay.
That's
yeah.
it. That's a thumbs up.
Are we leaving this mic on here, or what's happening?
I'm using this to talk.
Oh, you're using
Use
this.
this.
Okay.
This is. There we go.
Welcome, everybody. Wow. A lot of people here tonight. Thank you for making the trip down on a beautiful day. It's my pleasure to welcome R.J. Andrews to Cooper Union. R.J. is a San Francisco data storyteller, author, and lecturer. By day, he tackles high-stakes problems for clients like the White House and Google. By night, he studies the history of charts, maps, and diagrams. The overlap between R.J.'s hands-on real-world practice and deep historical research gave rise to this new book, Info We Trust. He is also author of Florence Nightingale Health and Mortality Diagrams and series editor of Information Graphic Visionaries. He has taught his data graphic series at Cooper Union and Letter from Archive. Please welcome R.J.
I believe data graphics are magical, and they make my brain feel really happy, but that's not why they're magical. So tonight I want to take about a half hour with you and talk a little bit about that magic, the kind of magic that only data graphics can bring. See, with data graphics, we can see things that we can't see in any other way. In any other way, without a data graphic, that thing would be invisible. Let me show you an example. Line graph. Now, we all experience time. We're all slaves to time, but we can't see time. Now, we have memories. We have a memory of what this used to look like, and we have foresight of what it might look like, but you can't really see time, at least not until we have a line graph, where it shows time so naturally as if you're just reading a book. Now, there's all kinds of charts, but maybe the most important chart is the bar chart, especially the vertical bar chart, or what we sometimes call a column chart, or a pipe of pan chart, or an organ chart. And a vertical bar chart operates on a different metaphor. It's not like you're reading the pages of books. It's more like you're looking at a stack of stuff. And sometimes things can be stacked in real life, like a stack of teacups or a stack of coins. I mean, imagine you earned a bunch of coins every day. You came home and you put your coins up on the dresser. And you could see over time, day by day, you could see the flow of time from left to right. Why? Because we read left to right. You'd see the amount. You could count all the little coins. You could see proportion. You could see this day I earned maybe twice as much as that day. And so with a bar chart, you can see a stack of things that you could actually see in real life. But then you start combining it with things like time. This is a very old bar chart. This bar chart is so old that it was created before we thought the bar chart was invented. It's by the geographer to the French king, Philippe Boache. And this is columns of water. Columns of the Seine River in France every month. And you can see that there's a big flood. That's what the big blue line at the very top is. Now, you can actually go and see how tall the river is. And you can see that we have this river staff gauge. It will tell you how tall the river is. But you can only see that once. You can see that in a moment. But with a chart, you can see it over time. And that's magical. And you can't see it in any other way. You can't see time in any other way than with the chart. Now, you can actually see it once, though, and that's pretty neat. The thing about charts is it also helps us things that you can't see in the real world, not even once. For example, all the taxes collected. I mean, you couldn't physically put all that money in a stack in one place, no matter how it was supported, right? And so the same metaphor of stacking coins, that same cartoon helps us start to see things that we can't see in real life, not once, but especially not over time. Now, if we're thinking about, since it is tax season, how many taxes we take in, the next natural question is, well, how do we spend them? I really love this chart because, how do charts come alive? Look at how the additional contribution is just a little nudged out, just a little bit. Look at how the alcohol is stacked up on barrels. Look at how it just falls away, but you can still see that contribution because of the dashed line. And it's just really attention to detail, those little design flourishes is what helps bring that chart to life. So far we've mentioned some charts, but there are other types of information graphics. I take a lot of inspiration from diagrams as well, particularly pictorial diagrams. There's all kinds of pictorial diagrams, but this is one of the most popular, one of our oldest ones, where you bring the heights of mountains or the lengths of rivers, things that you could go see in real life, but only one at a time. There's no way that you can take, a pyramid from Cairo and put it next to the Magic Kingdom Castle. But with a diagram you can, and you can compare how tall all of these monuments are. And that way, the diagrams defy the rules that govern space. And they defy the rules that govern space in a way that still, fit into and click into the way that we experience reality with our eyes. We can also defy the rules that govern time. If you were in Paris and watching the Eiffel Tower be constructed, well, you would see all these views, but you wouldn't see them all at once. And so there's a certain forcing function, a certain coordinating mechanism that brought us all here tonight. That's this book, Info We Trust. I've had the pleasure of talking about this book for the last few weeks to a couple different crowds, and I've gotten the same question over and over. And so I will answer that question now, which is, why is there a tree on the cover of this book? And so I was looking into the etymology of the title words, information, and information's easy. You have a messy pile of books on the floor, and you need to organize them, because you could pick one book up at a time, but you really wouldn't get a sense of what is this pile of books. But if you had a shelf, you took that messy pile of books, you put it in the shelf, and you arranged it by author last name, or how many pages, or subject matter, or the color of the binding. However you're doing it, you're taking that chaotic mess and you're putting it in formation, right? So information's easy. But the word trust has a much longer history. And the word trust is actually linked all the way back to the same root word as the word tree. Because a tree is strong, just like trust represents some sort of social strength. And so that is one of the ingredients that went into this cover. But my goal was to create something akin to like a mystical diagram, almost like a meditative diagram that sort of suggests different things, some sort of wonder with the world, with reality all around us. Okay, let's do a little test. Okay, can everybody clap for me? Just once? Okay, great. Okay, so I want you to clap once. I'm going to show you an image, and there's going to be two groups. There's going to be squares and circles, and they're going to be labeled A for circles, B for squares, group A, group B. And I just want you to pick apart the squares from the circles, okay? And then once you've done that, there's not that many. This is a test, but it's not a competition. Okay, so as soon as you've picked apart the squares from the circles, just give me one clap, okay? Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. Okay, let's do it again, though. Let's do it now, and instead of squares and circles, let's use color. Okay, so A from B, when you have it. Okay, slightly faster. Now, I want you, and this is the third and final one, but what I want you to do next is just let me know once you've separated groups A and B, okay? 3, 2, 1. Instantly, right? And so when we're making charts, we get to use all these different, what we sometimes call encoding channels. We get to use position, we get to use color, we get to use shape. And some of those things are more useful than others in different circumstances. One of the lessons of pulling apart things by position faster is that if you have something you really want your audience to recognize, to see, you might want to use position. If you want something that you really want your audience to notice, to pop out, you might use color. Now, these aren't really lessons from information design. These are lessons from design in general, from graphic design, from gestalt psychology. Sometimes we think about these lessons as binding groups together or popping things out from groups. How many people here have some sort of formal art school background or design school background? Give me hands. Yeah, so everybody has much, all of you have much more formal education than I do. But when I'm thinking about making charts and making data stories, I'm not just thinking about the rules and the standard practice of how charts are made. I'm thinking about how we experience the world to begin with. So I'm thinking about design, but I'm also thinking about things like museum exhibitions. And I'm thinking about how museum curators, they'll create an exhibition and they'll not only encourage you to engage, but they'll encourage you to keep engaging, to attract your attention, to help you not burn out, to help you not suffer from information overload. Thinking about museum creation, I'm thinking about storytelling. Storytelling is really interesting because you study, sort of how storytelling works, and storytelling is not about finding the truth. Sometimes that happens, and it's nice when it does. But you hear a rustle in the grass, and the truth is that rustle a lion or not, right? And you're a fool, if you go and check. There's a certain utility to not knowing the truth, to just running every time you hear a rustle in the grass. So we have lessons from storytelling, we have lessons from architecture. Architects teach me why one portal seems more alive than the other. And we have lessons from the art world, how art can make you feel something just with pure form. There's something different about each of these ovals. And it's not that one's better than the other, it's just maybe one's better suited for certain purposes. So these are some of the things that I think about as a practitioner, but also a lot of what was poured into the book. But at its heart, this book, like me, is obsessed with charts. So I want to show you some of my favorite charts. When we think of charts, I think that what comes to mind first is analysis. And charts are indeed useful for analysis. And so Galton, at the end of the 1800s, had weather stations reporting to him, and he had this kind of graphic language of putting little symbols all over the map, creating some of the first weather maps. And he's looking at these charts, and he realizes that there's continental-sized patterns happening. And he discovers something called the anticyclone effect, where you have certain rotations around high pressure and low pressure zones. And graphic discoveries are wonderful when they happen. But, in my line of work, I think it's honestly not that often that you're lucky enough to make this kind of scientific breakthrough, using a single image. I think of charts not so much as scientific tools, but as social tools. I'll give you more than one example. So over 100 years ago, in May 1913, New York City put on a parade celebrating some of its public health achievements, and they had these big floats displaying charts. And you can see that everybody turned out for this parade, even in the rain. I think that this is where charts are the most powerful, as rallying tools, as banners, as ways to remind people that here's this thing. It's not that we have the answer. Having the answer is good. Having the answer is quite honestly table stakes. Like, what you have to do is you have to have that answer and then beat people over the head with it over and over and over. It's not so much of, do you know this interesting fact? It's like, did you know that this topic even existed? Put this thing on the radar. And information graphics have been used in this way for a very long time. So information graphics as social tools. So this is one of the earlier slave ship diagrams, which has a very interesting multi-decade history. The first one actually faced the other way, and then it went to America, and it got flipped because they traced it. And then it goes back to England, it gets flipped again, and it becomes more and more elaborate. The most elaborate example of this slave ship diagram is William Wilberforce's slave ship model. So this is the Brooks slave ship. What's also very interesting is that this started as a diagram. It was sort of a cartoon. And then that cartoon got actually turned into a data visualization where they started fitting it into actual ships. When Wilberforce carried this model into the House of Parliament, he said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know." I think that's what charts are really about. Here's this thing. It's undeniable. So Wilberforce had a chief lieutenant named William Smith. William Smith had a granddaughter. Her name was Florence Nightingale. She used charts for advocacy as well. Again, not analytic tools. There's no eureka here. There's no we're trying to sort through the data and figure out ourselves what's going on. What she wanted people to notice, what she wanted people's attention on is the idea that there was a lot of death on one side, and then there's less death on the other side, and something happened along that dotted line. Don't you want to know what happened along that dotted line that made the deaths go down? It's not just that don't you want to know, don't you not want to forget. Nightingale returned from the Crimean War, desperate that all the lessons learned there on how to take care of patients would be lost. So she spent decades and decades fighting to get her different improvements that happened at war in place so that the next time the British Army went out, they wouldn't suffer such mass casualties. But it wasn't a single chart, and it wasn't a single chart shown once. It was lots of charts shown over and over decades, in order for her sanitary reform movement to be successful. And it was successful. The English sanitary reform movement is credited with saving 1 billion lives. But Nightingale, how many of those lives were saved by her? Nightingale was a leader, but not the leader for only a portion of the movement. How many lives did she save? How many lives did one of her publications save? How many lives did one of her charts save? It's very difficult to place an economic value on a single chart. When Nightingale's career was trailing off, another advocacy movement was picking up, the women's suffrage movement, and they rallied around charts. They rallied around this idea of women having the vote being white and women not having the vote being like slaves in chains and black. And this is one of their more spectacular maps, but they had all kinds of different maps. They had big billboards. They'd stretch them across the street. They would dress up in white or black and then march down the street in the formation of the country. So this idea of using information graphics to call attention and build momentum around a movement is old, and it's not dead. How many people know warming stripes? Show of hands. So this is popularized by Ed Hawkins, and the idea is that each line is a year, and here we have, this is probably, most of these, they can be keyed to your location, but usually when you see it's like the global temperature. And the idea is basically it's getting hotter. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. How many people saw charts like this during the pandemic? Yeah. There's a certain kind of like cheerful cuteness to a lot of charts. It's sort of like a nice to have or an extra flourish. But, charts do succeed when they're being used for advocacy. They do succeed as entertainment. But there are certain situations where charts are critical. And usually those situations are quite dire. These are situations where a lot of people are dying. So this is from John Burr Murdoch at the Financial Times. He updated this every day. And so you could see all of them and almost play a movie of how the pandemic rose and fell in different nations. And then recently, we have this. So this is a snapshot I took last week. This is this is a particularly red day, but this is 30-day change in the S&P 500. I don't have to convince you to go look at this chart. Everybody was looking at this type of chart last week. There are certain dire situations where you look at this. How would you see this any other way than a chart? It's an invisible phenomenon. I mean, maybe there's a way we could stack up all the bodies, right? Like you could think of physically doing it, but it'd be quite impractical. The market cap of a company, how do you see that? But with a chart. Sidebar is that this is a normal way is to see a 30-day average, right? You can see the last day, see a 5-day, but see year to date, see 1 year, see 5 years. There's all kinds of time frames, but you don't actually want to see 30 days. The problem with 30 days is that every 30-day period is going to be different because it's going to have a different number of weekend days, right? So you shouldn't look at 30-day averages. You should look at 28-day periods, and then you always have a nice, same number of weekend days. I believe charts are magical, and I believe the way we make them is a craft. It doesn't on its surface seem like a craft because often our products are pixel perfect as if they're made by a machine. And in some sense, most of these charts are put out by machines, but they're not really made by the machines. You can have automated charts, but those automated charts, and they might even be good charts, but those automated charts often don't, unless it's maybe, I don't know, rings on your watch, or the weather report, or a stock up and down, like something that's unique. If you want people's attention on the story, it has to have some sort of human involvement. So I think of craft as a hand-eye heart coordination. It's something that expands our understanding, empowers our actions. So after this, after our time here in the theater, we're going to go across the hall, and we have a little exhibition. And I can't give each and every one of you a tour of the exhibition, so I wanted to just give you sort of a quick kind of fly-through. And so there's two sides of the exhibition. One is related to the book. And so we have all kinds of elements from the book. We have text from the book. We have artwork and preparatory sketches. We have original artwork, and we have blown up illustrations. So that's the book side. But the other side is also really exciting, because the other side is this collection of fabulous contemporary information design and all kinds of historic analogs. Let me show you what I mean. So in the back, we have a tapestry rug by Giorgia Lupi. And then in front of it, we have this beautiful sculpture by Maggie Shih. And so here we have 140 years of temperature data. Each ring is 2 years, with 2024 at the very top. So here we have our warming rings once again. So it's a very, very beautiful piece, especially when you see it. You have to go see it and make sure you bend down and look up into the object. It's very, very beautiful, but very, very scary at the same time, because we've just tipped into a new color. That's by Maggie Shih. We also have Data Vandals, and Data Vandals are in the house. And Data Vandals installed a 13-foot tall, 100% bar chart. We also have this eclipse map. How many people saw the eclipse last year? Oh, wow. I think more people than any other survey question. That's really amazing. And so this is also something that has to be seen in person. I wanted to bring pieces into the exhibition that you just can't experience like this or like this. And the reason you have to see this in person is because all the sunlight is metallic and it all shimmers and shines. So this is by Kenneth Field, cartographer at Esri. And this has a historic analog, which is the first eclipse map in America from 1833, nearly 200 years earlier. We also have Nigel Holmes in the house. And Nigel's brought us his original artwork and original tools that he used to make this 1980 Time magazine graphic. This is the baby spike. This is adapted from a Scientific American piece by my friends Zan Armstrong, Nadieh Brehmer, and Jen Christensen. And it looks into this date of when are babies born? And it looks at around the day, around the week, and there's a third circle which you'll have to go to the gallery to see, which is around the year. And there's so many fascinating insights. You can see this sort of triple hump for every day. You can see that babies, mostly are not born at night. And so this yellow line is an average line that goes all the way around. And so below the average, right, is the evenings when babies normally aren't born. This is 8 a.m. These are all the scheduled C-sections, okay? This is when they come back from lunch. Okay, and then there's another burst before dinner. This also has a historic analog. Again, about 200 years earlier. This is Luke Howard's Temperature of London. And so we go around and it's the same idea. We have the average line going all the way around the seasons, and you have cooler temperature, cooler than average, and warmer than average. Blue and red. And just like our bar charts, stacks of stuff, and just like our line graphs, turning pages in a book, moving through time left to right, this is also operating on, physical reality. I think one of the sad things about, being on screens all the time is, it's almost like they're trying to convince us we don't have bodies. But we do have bodies. Like, we experience the world in a very particular way. A very particular way, but also in a very similar way, right? Like, all of our eyes are forward-facing and they're near the tops of our, near the tops of our bodies. We have particular ways of experiencing the world. And so our experience of the world is rooted in our body and how our body processes the world, how our body processes reality. And we process the world in very similar ways. Now, this also has, it's a cycle, right? And it's useful to kind of like string all these months all the way around and go around and around and around, but that circle exists in reality, right? Because the Earth is actually moving around the sun, right, in a giant circle. And so when we illustrate, the year in a circle, it's almost as if we're taking that enormously huge circle and then bringing it down so it can fit on our canvas. I want to show you something else. How many people have seen Notre Dame de Paris? Yeah. So I'm very lucky that my family's here tonight. And when I was, how old, Dad? 13 years old? We went to Paris, and it was an absolutely, just a spectacular experience. Seeing, it's not just how big it is or how grand it is, but there's also some sort of history there and all the stories and all the ages that this building has lived through. And then I returned again. I got to see it again when I was on my honeymoon. And again, you're kind of like just like standing in front of this cathedral and just marveling at all its intricacies. And everybody who's done that, who's gone to Paris and stand in front of this famous building, is facing a certain direction, right? The cathedral orients you when you look at it, and it faces you towards the altar at the other end of the cathedral, but it just doesn't do that. It's actually also facing you in a particular direction. And even though you're there having the most, incredibly rich, like you can smell, kind of like what it smells like kind of experience, you couldn't see this, like what it's actually doing, where it's facing you. What you would have to do is like be in a matrix kind of like white room and have all the cathedrals from France fly in one by one. side by side. And only then would you notice that, like, wait a second, they're all facing me in the same direction. And who's read the book and knows why they're facing? Any guesses? A lot of mumbles. So, wouldn't it be cruel if I say you have to read the book to find out? The cathedrals are facing you towards sunrise. And so there's actually a spectrum of sunrises in France, and so the cathedral's actually angled a little bit this way, a little bit that way, because it's a sunrise on a particular day important to that particular cathedral, maybe the feast day of a saint or something. But you could be in front of any one of these and never figure that out. You have to look at all of them all at the same time. I believe information graphics are really magical. Reality is really confusing. It seems to be getting more confusing. We all have kind of crappy reality detectors, on our own. It's been hundreds of years since a single person had all the world's knowledge. Maybe a single person never had all the world's knowledge. We really need each other to try to navigate reality together, to develop better shared ways of understanding. I believe information graphics is not a silver bullet, but I think it's one of the ways that we can build better shared understandings of reality. I believe information graphics are social tools. I believe that they are magical. If you've seen the book, that you know that it's loaded with all of these quotes from contemporary designers, but also a lot of quotes from historic designers. And one of the people I discovered a couple of years ago is this essentially a textbook author named Carl G. Carson. And he said, a world turning to a saner and richer civilization will be a world turning to charts. And he said that over 100 years ago. And I think the quote's still true. And so I think we're going to transition really soon to Q&A, both with questions from online, but especially in the room. Before I close this portion, I just want to say, thank you so much for coming out and showing your enthusiasm for information graphics. We do have a party afterwards, so Q&A won't go too long. So please join us, afterwards in the gallery. We also have lots of books. Thank you for your enthusiasm for charts. Go make great charts, but don't just make them by yourself. Go make great charts together. Thank you very much. So I have this superpower, which is that I've survived doing this for like over a decade. And so my superpower is I have all these friends who are really, really good at this. And so one of my rules is don't critique in public. I think it's like a waste of time. It makes you feel good for about a second to tell somebody they did something stupid, and then you feel awful, and they never take your advice anyway. But you do need critique. You do need people to say, that doesn't work. And the thing about that doesn't work is any fool can tell you that it's not working. Anybody who's not a practitioner or an expert or anything can tell you this is not working. But there are some special people like Nigel, people like Jason Forrest, who's here. And these special people, they not only say it's not working, they can tell you how to fix it. And they can give you ideas, and they can give you references. And so that's my superpower, is that I have this collection of friends who are able to tell me how to do things better. So that's one way of working together, is that you're sourcing a lot of input as you're making things. I think one of the worst things that you can do is go away in a cave for like 3 months and make something precious and then bring it out and show the world. Like you really, really need, and this is maybe true in many creative endeavors, not just charts. Like you really need feedback. And again, from normies, like anybody can tell you it's not working. So anybody who gives you attention, right? Like tell them. No, so that's sort of a way of making charts together where you're sort of spearheading the effort. And that's often the case. There's not a lot of, if you're in a situation where you get to, make a chart together with somebody who's also really talented and have devoted their life to making charts every day, then you're very, very lucky. I think it's more common that you're kind of like by yourself. But if you are so lucky to be together, yes, being in person is fantastic, but it's not essential. I did this project with Wendy Shijia Wang, and Wendy is in Shanghai, and I'm in San Francisco, and we did this project, and it took about a year, and the entire thing was asynchronous, and it was all done through this platform called Notion, and it was like heavily, heavily documented, and we both had and I think most people here are New Yorkers or consider themselves New Yorkers. It's really amazing how serious you are about doing a good job, like the level of intensity you bring to everything. It's very, very impressive and appreciated. But Wendy's that kind of person. And so she's the kind of person that will put like a stupid amount of effort into working on each incremental step. But that takes a special person to like go on that journey together. Yeah.
Hi. Do charts have a focal point? In some of the graphs that we've seen, it was hard to sort of find where that might be. Maybe you could speak to that a little.
Do you mean like a visual focal point?
Yeah, or in terms of...
They can. So I think there's a lot of different charts and a lot of different ways that charts are used. And so, we saw Giorgia Lupi's rug earlier. Like, does that have a focal point? No, it's like, it's an aesthetic object. It's more of a vibe. It's quite literally furniture, right? Furniture for a room. I have one, and it's beautiful, and it makes me happy every time I see it. It doesn't have a focal point, and that's okay. When you open Google Maps, it has a focal point in the sense that it's centered on you. But forget that. Like, does it have a focal point? Like, no. And so sometimes charts are maps to a certain reality. It's a certain way of understanding a territory. And that territory might actually be geographic territory, or it might be something more abstract, like a stock market. Here's a map of the stock market. Here's a map of Wikipedia. Go exploring. There's no focal point there. Now, Florence Nightingale's chart did have a focal point. She's like, simple comparison. There's a big object, there's a little object. Let me tell you about that. Let me tell you about this weird thing I made. And so sometimes we think of this as the difference between sort of like a data map versus like a data story. Sometimes we think of this in terms of persuasive graphics where it's really, really pointed. I want to show you while we're waiting for the next question up, I want to show you what Wendy and I made. So we saw this graphic earlier. This is one of the ways I think about charts that need a focal point. So the chart needs a comparison, right? I show you this kind of chart, and everybody's already done the same thing if you've looked at it, which is that you've said, oh, there's a tall bar and a short bar. You've made a comparison, It doesn't say tall bar, it doesn't say short bar. I've juxtaposed them in a way that, one looks taller than the other. That's what you've done. I've kind of forced you to engage with the chart. Here, let's see. That's the proper one. You see that? This is what you do. And so one of the ways of thinking about charts with a focal point is you're trying to create comparisons. And so here's a frame from a short film I did about the national parks, and we have a comparison. These are transverse profile cuts. And so you have Half Dome in Yosemite, and you have the river in each valley or canyon. And you can see that Yosemite is wider than Zion. You can see that Yosemite is deeper than Zion. They both exist at a similar sea level. Well, it's kind of the same thing. It's A versus B. Now, technically, this took a lot more work to put together, but who cares? Anybody can look at this and say, okay, make a comparison, green versus yellow. So I made this piece over 10 years ago. And I really liked it. I really liked the idea behind it. but I wasn't satisfied with it. And it took that much time to kind of figure out, well, really to meet Wendy. And I'll show you what Wendy and I did. So I started here, and I had this idea, this kind of, missing piece, which is like, imagine you're a god walking across America with a cookie cutter. And you took your cookie cutter in each national park like this, and you took a section out and put it on a chessboard, right? And then you could compare the three-dimensional pieces of the national parks to each other. And you'd be able to see, this is a tall one, and this is a green one, and this is a tan one, and I don't know what else you'd see. Like, I really wanted to see that. And so Wendy helped me see that. And so we went from something like this to this. So we call this delicious parks. And let's see here, let's see the comparison. Yeah, so here's Yosemite versus Zion. And it's different. I don't think it's better, it's just different. This is what I wanted to see. And this is sea level at the bottom, and you can see how tall it is. You can figure out, you can see how Yosemite's so weird. Yosemite's a very strange place. It has this Y-shaped fork. And you can make a comparison between Yosemite and Zion. Hawaii volcanoes, Crater Lake. So each one got little flourishes, right? We're putting bathymetry data so you can actually look into the lake. And we're using a little bit of aerial imagery here to kind of pop some of those browns. Make charts, but more importantly, make charts together. And that's Wendy and me. And after we finished the project and it was published in a design atlas, we finally got to meet each other. And she brought me, you can see there, she brought me little 3D printed versions of our models for me to have.
Hi there. You mentioned Notion to help with your communications, but I'm wondering, are there technologies or tools that you're excited about that you're currently using, or sort of what your
There's
creative
one tool I
process
use
is?
for every project, which is a pencil and paper. And that's been the most consistent, woo!
Love it.
That's been the most consistent through line. Now, there are really talented coders, developers, who I think have the same kind of fidelity so why is a pencil magical? A pencil is magical is the fastest way to externalize an idea, to get something out of your head and into the real world. And why that's important is that once it's in the real world, it's out of your head, it's not in your working memory, you can look at it and you can react to it. And you can change it and you can improve it, you can do something different. And that feedback cycle is very, very important. And so the pencil and paper is a thinking tool, right? Some people can make art with a pencil and paper. That's not the primary way I use pencil and paper. This is another question authors always get, who'd you write the book for? So I actually had a couple people in mind who I was writing for, and one of them was my friend Shirley. And Shirley, this is on auto. So this, can we go backwards? Maybe not. And so the idea of having pencil and paper and digital screen going back and forth, because there's a certain speed to working. There's a certain speed to working with pencil and paper that doesn't always exist when you're working digitally. And so some things are faster, better on pencil and paper. Some things are faster and better digitally. You can't actually see data on pencil and paper. You can, but it's slow. You can't see a lot of data. But it's more than that. It's just that it's a different context. It's a different mode of thinking. And when you're making anything creative, you want as many angles and modes of thinking as possible. All right, so that was kind of like a non-answer to your question.
I'll accept it.
Yeah, in terms of technology, my experience, I'm technology agnostic. I've used all kinds of tools, all kinds of libraries, and each one is flawed in unique ways. And so what you have to do is sort of, figure out what best suits what you're doing and kind of go from there. My experience is they all sort of are based off of similar batch of metaphors, and so once you learn a couple, then you can kind of use them all.
Thanks for that amazing talk.
Oh, hey, Karen.
So I was intrigued by the idea of made by hand versus made by machines. And I feel like nowadays, with all this AI stuff, it's crazy what it can do. You can start with something made by hand and feed that to the machine and then have something, higher fidelity version of it made by machines. So I'm curious what your take is on generative artificial intelligence and sort of the role it can play.
Yeah.
And what are the ideal user interfaces for someone who's creative, who wants to bring things to life using these things, these machines?
So I don't think there's one answer, and I don't think, if there is an answer, I don't think I have it. But I think what I've observed is that some makers are hypercritical. And I mean, if you look at history and the march of technology, I mean, like, day to day, it can be quite cruel and chaotic and frankly, like, maybe depressing. You know, if you're making buggy whips and the automobile comes out, you know, you have a problem. You know, you like, you have to figure out how to transition to making fancy handbags. And so we're in one of those moments. And so there's lots of things to critique. But in the same way that I don't want to critique in public, you want to look for the optimistic, generated, happy thing. Because there's always something that you can critique. There's always something, you know, that's wrong, you know, with what's going on. And you can spend your life thinking like that. Or you can go try to make something, you know, good, cheerful, inspiring, positive, and focus your energy that and spend all your time in that mind frame. And, you know, I try to spend as much time as I can, you know, without being foolish. You know, one of the title words is trust. You know, one of the ways of thinking about trust is that it's sort of like an agreement to cooperate in the future. You know, trust is all about the future. We have a new arrangement of a new set of cooperations that we have to negotiate, and that we're just starting to figure out how to negotiate with the AI agents, with the AI companies, with the AI models, et cetera. And so my orientation is like, well, like, let's try to figure out what that cooperation is. Yeah. So even less than like digital tools of how to make a chart, I don't have a hard recommendation. But I have found, you know, amazing, fascinating ways to do cool things with, you know, with these things.
Hi there. I'm here behind this podium.
Hey.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. I actually have I'm interested to hear your thoughts. So I'm a graphic designer and I work with like people and data. And I feel like when I work with them, they often request like the very traditional like bar charts, line graphs.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to hear your reflections on like.
Okay, so the first 5 or 6 years I was doing this, I was really into bespoke contraptions. Like I'm going to invent a new chart just for your data. And I still love these, and I still like, you know, reading other people's. And then I had this moment. I was actually here, or over one of these directions, in the World Trade Center, like one of these fishbowl conference rooms, looking out. I could see the Statue of Liberty. I was teaching them. I felt like I was just awesome. And I was like mid-sentence in one of my spiels, and they said, no, you don't get it. Our CEO will read a bar chart, a line graph, a pie chart, and maybe a dot on a map, and that's it. That's all you get. And ever since, and so that really threw me back. But I thought about that, and then I started looking at the history of information design, you know, with an eye for these what I call sort of like fundamental or basic charts. And, you know, are they really fundamental or basic? Or are they just the most familiar? I don't know. Well, that's what we started with, right? We started with a bar chart and a line graph. And I've come to appreciate how expressive these things can be. Of course, you know, what's amazing about them is, you know, if anybody knows how to read any charts, then, you know, they're probably prepared to read those charts. And if you look across the history of information design, you can see that you can actually do quite a lot with bar charts and line graphs. It's not like they have 20 degrees of freedom, like 20 things. They have 100 different things that you can tweak. And there's beautiful examples from modern design and also from the history of the craft of doing wonderful things with bar charts and line graphs. And it's not just weird charts versus basic charts. It's also kind of like interactive contraptions, right? Scrollytelling or a tooltip or an interactive versus just like a static chart that's just a singular image. And once again, you know, I'm not critical of either, but I don't poo-poo the simple stuff. Like, I think the simple stuff is very, very powerful, and just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's not sophisticated.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question here. I really liked what you said about the kind of necessary abstraction to visualizing some things that aren't possible, like seeing all the money in front of you or whatnot. And even speaking to the quote on the screen, I think I personally am a designer and I work in insurance data company, and I'm trying to figure out how to visualize a complex topic like indemnity. And I think that, or I guess what I'm asking is, what is your approach to these really modern and complex things that we can't necessarily visualize and tell that story in something that requires so much education as well?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're already in that field, I think the question is that does the audience know anything about that field or not, right? Like how literate they are in that field, and so you kind of start there. But there are, this idea in machine learning models of like latent space. Multi-dimensional models are very complex. Should you even try to visualize it? Is that fair to the model or not? My guess is like it's good to make pictures. And it's like good to make a picture and show it to people, see what they get, see what's useful, like what works, what doesn't work. You remind me of a chart from the New York like mutual life insurance company from the 1870s. And what they had is they had a smooth line, which was their data model, of when, I don't know, when somebody might die, right? And so they have a smooth line, and then they have a jagged line of the actual data. And they have it shaded either, red or blue, whether their model was right or wrong, right? And so like what you're doing trying to figure out this new data is what people have been doing for decades and decades, if not centuries, which is like we have this weird new data, we have this new way of understanding reality. It's really complex, and you're using pictures to try to figure out that complexity, explain it to other people. And so that doesn't make it easy. Like it's always been hard, right? It's always been hard, but it's like it's very necessary if we're going to wrangle like this new data chaos, that your company and clients have brought into the world. A mic going in the back row.
Thank you. I was wondering, do you have any favorite visual artists that are working with charts?
When you say artist, what do you mean?
I'm thinking of maybe somebody more in the visual fine arts, sculpture, painting,
Yeah, I mean,
that realm. Something less utilitarian, perhaps.
less utilitarian. So I think that utilitarian. So the question is, how do you like? I sort of started constructing like, how do you value a chart, right? And I think that saying that something because you're not getting a mathematical answer to your business report that doesn't have value. I think that's hogwash. Like engagement, entertainment, sparking some wonder, the creative process for the artist. Like all these things are there's just different types of value, and so I think there's like a lot of and another way of thinking of it is a pure form. And so I beg you to cross the hall and go see Giorgia Lupi's, textiles. We have 2 articles of clothing, from a project and one of her rugs, and they're beautiful and they're vibrant, and you're going to be there for a moment if you actually want to decode what she's doing, which you could, but there's something more to it than just like being able to read, some sort of analytic insight, from her textiles. And that's just kind of like the surface of all the, incredible like data, color, and textures that she's created. Yeah.
Hello, RJ.
Hey, Pete.
So, listen to Joe Rogan and other podcasts. Information is becoming power. How can we, with this graphics, make sure that information isn't put into a power of shock and awe or moving someone into a certain direction based on the information that's given, i.e., that snapshot of the stock market?
Yeah.
Everyone around was, oh God. How can we look at that and say, well, that's just a snapshot rather than let's not jump to conclusions.
That's right.
Same
Yeah,
thing as
and I selected that snapshot. Like, I chose the day, right, to get as much red on the screen as possible. So, like, charts, I think on the whole, charts are good. But they've certainly been used for ill. You know, it's kind of like there's a lot of beautifully designed, you know, charts from the late 1930s Germany that I could show you. And so they're tools, right? Information is tools, charts are tools. I do think on the whole that they're good though, because you can have because they're so often used to communicate, to help people have some sort of like shared understanding, that doing it with a chart necessitates some sort of context. You're building out some additional information than just a one line. You know, if I said, you know, how do we get to dinner at night? And like, oh, we're going to go 3 blocks south, and then bang a left, and then you'll be on this avenue, and there it is. And you know, that's very efficient, but it's also, you know, sort of risky, because when I just give you the directions like that, it's possible for me to misspeak. It's easy for me to lie. Whereas if I bring out a map and I show you the map and show you exactly where it is, and I say those same words, that there's some sort of more trust in that thing. So even though graphics have been used for propaganda, and you know, there's reams of, you know, Soviet 5-year plan kind of atlases, you know, showing how production is very, very strong this year. Like, they can be used for ill, but on the whole, I think that they're used for good. You know, before we talked a little bit about comparisons, you know, tall bar, short bar. You know, having a comparison, you know, I think builds a little bit of trust. You know, I could just tell you, well, we have these two things, and one is this much more than the other. I'd rather show you the two things and have you come to that conclusion. You know, when you navigate the world, if you just see a single number, like here's a stock market on a bad day, but I don't say it's a bad day, I say here's a stock market. You should be suspicious. You know, if I'm not giving you a comparison, or you don't have no comparison reference, you should be suspicious. You know, if somebody's serving you a lonely number, you should start asking questions. And one of the lines is sort of like, you know, a good chart like answers a question, but a great chart's going to ask, you know, make you ask, you know, more questions. Like, that's kind of what we want. So, not easy, Pete. Sorry. It is almost 7:30. Do we have one more question, Kara? Then we should go across the hall, I think.
Hi. Oh, I'm hot on mic. Thank you again for a great presentation. I'm thinking about this because someone described sort of charts as sometimes utilitarian or functional even. As a career data analyst, where charts can be art, but I would not describe myself as a career artist. Earlier today, I made something a map because my stakeholder said, it's geospatial data, so of course it should be a map. And that definitely got me thinking about like how do constraints affect the creation of charts, especially if you interpret charts as art form. And especially yesterday, for people who are in like the Tableau space or as Iron Viz, and one of the commentators said like, okay, geospatial data doesn't have to be represented as a map. And you said a comment earlier about not only about a map of geographic information, but also a map of financial data. To what degree does the type of data really actually create constraints when someone's producing a chart? And in what way do people have to be really conscious about that, just beyond the purely functional, beyond whatever business stakeholders want? How does the nature of data actually really constrain what you're doing with a chart?
I mean, certain data lends itself or yields, you know, certain chart forms more naturally. And so if you depart from those natural pathways, then you might be, you know, creating something weird or different, which might be a good thing. But it might also not be a good thing, and so you just want to be conscious of that. Yeah. Okay, I think we should all go across the hall. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the gallery.